Hello, Julie here. It's nice to be back. The other night, I was asleep. I really like sleeping. I am a big fan of sleeping. It's one of my favourite things to do. I think a good sleep is marvellous, especially at night time, because that's what you're supposed to do, isn't it? At night, you're supposed to be asleep. It was the early hours of the morning, kind of around 4 o'clock, and I was asleep. Everyone in my house was asleep. Something I don't like when I'm asleep is being woken up. And there I was, fast asleep, 4 a.m, when suddenly, downstairs in the house, there was a big crash and it woke me up. We wondered what it was. We weren't really sure. So we got up and we came downstairs and we came through the front room into the back where the noise had come from, right underneath where I was sleeping. And in there we found my cat. One of my cats, not the one who was in my other assembly. This one was Loki, my cat, who appropriately is named after the Viking god of mischief. And there he was, 4 a.m, on top of a bookshelf where he had knocked off half the books. They'd landed on the piano with a crash and woken me right up. I wasn't very impressed. We cleared up the mess and we went back up to bed and went back to sleep. And when we came down the next day properly and we had a proper look around where he'd knocked everything off the bookshelf, we found this. Now this is a bookend. It's really heavy and it has a cat on it, appropriately enough. And you put it on your bookshelf and you put your books up next to it on the shelf and it stops them falling over. And this was actually a present to me quite a long time ago by John Froud, who you sometimes see in assemblies, and his wife. They gave this to me and my husband as a wedding present. And when we found it the day after Loki had woken us up, we found, you can't maybe see properly, this next to it. This is this cat's ear. You will see this ear, nice and tall, this one not so much. Loki had knocked my bookend off the bookcase and broken the cat's ear. Uh-oh. Now, I'm going to be honest, I wasn't that impressed with Loki for waking me up. Also, not very impressed with him for breaking my bookend that was a present. However, he is a cat and he doesn't really understand what he's doing. He didn't do it on purpose. And so I thought today, in assembly, I'd try and mend my bookend and see if we could mend that ear back on. Because quite often things get broken, don't they? And a lot of the time we might be able to mend them. So I've got here some glue, some tacky glue and a little brush. I'm going to get some glue on the brush. And then on the broken bit of cat's ear, hopefully we'll be able to stick the cat's ear back on. So the glue will be doing its sticky job now, sticking the ear back together. Because it's good, isn't it? If something gets broken, it's good to mend it. There we go. Ta-da! You see, the ear is stuck, isn't it? That, I would say, is a pretty good job of fixing that broken ear. You would never know that it had been broken. So I'm going to pop that on the floor to dry. Isn't it good to be able to mend things when we've broken them? I think so. Now, I've got something else to show you as well, actually, here, which is this. This is, I don't really need it today because it's lovely and warm, but this is my blanket. It's quite big, it's very soft, and it's really snuggly, and I love it because it's big enough for me to snuggle right under in the winter when it's cold. I can wrap myself right up in this and sit on the sofa and read or watch TV, and it keeps me toasty and warm. I used to have a blanket very similar to this one, actually, but not as big. And when I had that blanket, one day, somebody that I know quite well, who's quite young and was even younger then, they were maybe only around 5, got really angry with me. And they found themselves a pair of scissors, and they went and got my old blanket, which they knew was one of my favourite blankets, and they cut it with their scissors because they were cross with me. Oh, hello, Lokes. this is Loki, the cat who broke my bookend. He's come to join the assembly. Look, he loves my blanket too. But yes, the person that knows me very well, who'd got cross with me, took their scissors to my old blanket and cut it in a way that couldn't be mended. And afterwards, when they'd finished being angry with me, they felt really bad about it and they were really sorry. So what they did was they got a grown-up to help them, and they bought me this new blanket to replace the one they'd cut up, which is actually even better than the one they cut up because it's bigger and snugglier in the winter for keeping me warm. So that was a good way to mend the broken relationship, because they'd done something that made me sad, and they mended it without being able to mend the thing they'd broken. They still did something to mend the relationship, and that's good too, isn't it? If we've done something to hurt somebody, it's good to mend it. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you about today. I'm going to tell you one of my favourite stories from the whole Bible. You probably know we've recently celebrated Easter, where we talked about Jesus dying on the cross and Christians believing he comes back to life again. Last week's assembly had John in it, talking about some of Jesus' friends seeing him after he came back to life, and Jesus walking with them and giving them some bread. And this is another story of what happened after Jesus' body had gone missing from the tomb, whilst his followers were kind of trying to work out whether he was still alive, whether he'd come back to life, and what was going to happen next. You can imagine how they're feeling. Their lives, Jesus' friends, have kind of completely changed. Their best friend, who'd been leading them for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, now suddenly had died. Then his body has gone missing from his tomb. They've seen him, so they're kind of thinking maybe he's come back to life. But how can people come back to life? What's going to happen next? What does this mean for them? They're pretty confused. So a group of them go down to the Lake Galilee, and they're hanging around by the lake, probably with all of these thoughts swirling through their heads. Now Peter, Jesus, one of his closest friends, we know from the Easter story the last thing Peter did for Jesus before he was killed, after he'd been arrested but before they killed him, was that Peter let him down. 3 times Peter was asked the night Jesus was arrested if he was friends with Jesus. And 3 times Peter said, "No, I don't know him. I tell you, I've never met him. I don't know the man." So the last thing Peter had done for Jesus was let him down. And now if Jesus is back to life again, what does that mean for Peter's friendship with him? All of that must have been swirling in Peter's head as he was there by Lake Galilee that day. And he turned to his friends and he said, "I'm going out fishing." Now, Lake Galilee was a really special, important place for Jesus and his friends, because it's where a lot of them had been fishing, where they worked as fishermen before they were friends with Jesus. It's where they met him and started following him. It's where they'd spent time together. It was on a boat on Lake Galilee that they'd seen Jesus calm the storm. And it was on a boat on Lake Galilee that they'd seen Jesus walk on water. And it was on that water of Lake Galilee that Peter had got out of the boat and walked to Jesus on the water too. So this is a really special place for them with lots of memories, but it's also where they used to live and work before they were friends with Jesus. The fishing is what they used to do as a job before they were friends with Jesus. So when Peter says, "I'm off out fishing," he's going back to something he knows how to do. He knows it inside out, and it's going to soothe him and make him feel better about things while it's so confusing. And the other followers who are there with him, they say, "We'll come with you." And out they go on a boat onto the lake, and they let down their nets and they fish all night. That's when you go fishing. That's when the fish are busy. They know this. They're fishermen. That's what they do. They're experts at fishing. They fish all night. But do you know how many fish they catch? None. Not a single one. That must have been a bit of a punch to the guts, I imagine. They're fishermen. They're good at fishing. They know how to do it. They've gone back out there after everything that has happened with Jesus to try and find some peace, and they can't even catch fish anymore. The sun starts to come up. It's morning time, and they look out to the beach, and there's a person standing there watching them. And the person on the beach calls out to them, "Friends, have you caught any fish?" And they have to say, "No." And then the person on the beach says, "You're not doing it right. I bet if you put your nets down on the right side of the boat, you'll catch loads of fish then." How annoying that must have been. They're the ones out on the boat, on the water. They're the expert fishermen. They've been there all night. They know where the fish are, and they haven't caught them because they're not there. If they were there, they'd have caught them before now, wouldn't they? But they do what the stranger says. They take their nets, they let them down on the right side of the boat. And they wait. And they wait. And they wait. And when it comes time to pull the nets into the boat, they can't do it. Because the nets, where there were no fish before, are now so full of fish they can't pull them into the boat. And then John, one of Jesus' friends, looks at the man on the shore and says, "It's him. It's the Lord. It's Jesus." And Peter is so excited to see his friend Jesus on the shore. He puts his coat on and then jumps into the water. What? He's so excited. He puts his coat on to go swimming. He's lost his mind with excitement and he swims back to shore. He's in a boat. He could have sailed back to shore, but he's so excited to see Jesus and to get there first. He has to swim to get there quicker with his coat on. His friends follow behind in the boat, and when they get to shore, they see Jesus is there, and there's a little fire burning with some hot coals, and there's some fish cooking on the fire, and there's some bread. And Jesus turns to them and says, "Bring me some of the fish you've just caught." So Peter goes to get some fish, and he counts them, and there are 153 big fish in the nets. Jesus cooks them a barbecue breakfast on the beach. Fish and bread, loaves and fish. And then after breakfast, he asks Peter to go for a walk with him. Now Peter must be wondering, what is this about? Jesus wants to speak to me on my own. I know the last thing I did for him was let him down. I said I didn't know him 3 times. Maybe he wants to tell me off. Maybe things are not right between us. Maybe Peter felt a bit uncomfortable. But as they're walking, Jesus turns to him and he says, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, I love you." And Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." And then a few minutes later he says, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, Jesus, I love you. You know I love you." And Jesus says, "Look after my sheep." A few minutes later, Jesus turns to Peter and says again, "Peter, do you really love me?" And Peter says, "Yes, Jesus, you know I love you. You know everything about me." And Jesus says, "Feed my sheep." It's good to mend things when they're broken, isn't it? It's good to put them right. And this is a story all about mending. How many times before Jesus was killed did Peter say he didn't know who he was? 3. I don't know him. That's how he let Jesus down. How many times did Jesus ask Peter if he loved him? And Peter said, "Yes, I love you." 3. You know I love you. And then Jesus gave Peter a task to do. He said, "Look after my people, take care of them." And in doing that, Jesus shows Peter that he forgives him for what's gone wrong before. Peter puts things right by saying he still loves Jesus. And Jesus shows he's forgiven him by giving him a job to do. It doesn't matter that you let me down. You're still good enough to be my friend and to carry out this task for me. I still want you to be part of my group of friends and follow me. I've still got work for you to do. You don't have to be perfect. It's good to mend things when they get broken, isn't it? It's good to mend relationships if they get broken. It's good to put things right if we've let people down. And then it's good to forgive each other and still be friends. Just like Jesus and Peter. Because Jesus knew we're not perfect, we make mistakes. But we can put things right and have a second chance. That's pretty good, isn't it? I think so. So next time you break something, maybe an actual thing, maybe a relationship, next time you do something silly, make a mistake and do something wrong, remember, it's good to mend things, isn't it?